So thank you to Peter Levin and Matt Leininger for inviting me to share my thoughts on where I think the frontiers of democracy are. Before I attempt to sketch where I think we're going or should be going, let me take stock of where we come from. So it's been less than 250 years that democracy came back on the historical stage after a long eclipse of about 2,000 years since the days of ancient Athens. Democracy was reinvented in the 18th century at the time of the American and French revolutions, and since then we've only known it as various iterations of what's called representative government, a regime centered around the election of elites who act as trustees of the larger public. The early prototype, if you will, in the 18th century was called parliamentary democracy. Then, in the 19th century and 20th century, we moved to party democracy. Today, we have, since roughly the second half of the 20th century, something that people call audience democracy, where partisanships have partisan allegiances have weakened and leaders need to cultivate a more personal relationship to their audiences. But these three iterations are just riffs on the same model, a model in which elected elites make the decisions on our behalf, and we get to watch and sanction them once in a while. The crucial novelty of this modern democracy, compared with the version known in ancient Greece, was that in it was no longer ordinary citizens who got to rule, it was elected elites. So it was a government-centric democracy as opposed to a citizen-centric democracy. I believe that today we find ourselves at the historical juncture where we are witnessing the end of that paradigm and the birth of a new one. I don't know what the name of this replacement is going to be. It could be a lot of things. It could be open democracy, liquid democracy, some say lotocracy. I call it for myself post-representative democracy. It's a more open-ended terminology. And by that, I'm trying to capture something about the future, but also something normative, something about what we should aim for. And so this is here the normative dimension that I want to emphasize. In post-representative democracy, I hasten to say, doesn't mean that we should embrace a full repudiation of representation, as in direct democracy. I simply mean by that post-representative democracy is an ideal that's much broader, much more complex and richer than representative government. And so that's what I'm trying to capture. And it deserves its own theorization and name, if you will. Post-representative democracy is, to me, the answer to the seismic changes induced by the combination of globalization and the digital revolution we've witnessed over the last 50 years. Both of these things, both individually and in conjunction, have fundamentally changed the way citizens over the world see themselves or are about to see themselves. And it should thus change the way political theorists and institutional designers should rethink democracy and popular legitimacy, democratic legitimacy. Indeed, the public is no longer and can no longer be treated as a silent mass, a passive spectator, or a sleeping sovereign, all the metaphors that were in currency up to now. It is no longer also a national constituency of individuals who only expect to make decisions relative to a specific geographic zone that they happen to live in. The public now is on its way to becoming a co-creator of everything, virtually anywhere, from the economic world of goods and services, where online crowds act as de facto designer, consultants, producers, prosumers, funders, advertisers, shareholders, to the semi-public world of virtual commons like Wikipedia or social networks like Facebook, eBay, Twitter, etc. The public, in my view, is now chomping at the bit to be involved in similar ways in the world of politics. Not necessarily all the time, but in ways that are timely and compatible with their busy lives. Citizens more and more also see themselves as members of communities that do not strictly map onto state boundaries and indeed often go way beyond them. It is cliché, but true to say that people now see themselves as global citizens with a stake in what is going on in the Arab world, in China, in Sudan, and in fact they're also part of all these virtual communities that we also need to rethink. So the democracy of the future needs to be shaped by this new reality. It will need to erase or redraw the traditional dichotomies of representative government. It will need to be citizen-centric, and better still, in fact, people-centric, as opposed to government-centric. So it won't just be an upgrade of representative government. I think it will be something different. Let me explain several ways in which post-representative democracy will be different, or should be different. First, the principle of elections will no longer be the unique or even the central mechanism to select legitimate representatives. New selection methods should be considered. Random selection is one, of which I'm a big fan, along with other people, including some in this room. Self-selection is another. Any ways, in other words, to put back in power ordinary citizens, as opposed to professionalized elites. Representation then should no longer be conceived as a one-to-one relationship between elected representatives and constituents. It should be a more multidimensional relationship of one-to-many, many-to-one, or even many-to-many. Post-representative democracy also goes beyond the classic dichotomy trustee-delegate. We are moving towards a form of liquid democracy where the feedback loop between represented and representatives is much tighter, interactive, and frequent, so that these distinctions no longer make sense. Post-representative democracy favors open systems of governance, meaning systems that are transparent, participatory, and collaborative. It means it becomes the job of government to consult the public much more frequently and let them express their concerns much more richly than through a vote every 4 years. That means they will need to create crowdsourcing platforms to obtain the information from the people and train scores of talented analysts to sift through the comments and process them properly. It means they will need to give the people citizens' initiatives by which they can put legislation to parliament. Generally speaking, post-representative democracy should be adapted to new technologies and empowered by them. It is a democracy consciously augmented by digital tools and social media in a way that turn government from this slow-moving, opaque, and unresponsive machine into an agile, constantly updating and responsive platforms. And here I really want to emphasize the difference between the age of the print, radio, and TV and the age of the internet. Because often people say, well, it's just one more technology and it will just be a marginal tweak on what we know. But these earlier technologies, it's worth emphasizing, only allowed for unidirectional communication flows from leaders to the people, with no feedback loop built in. Digital technologies, social media, allow for interactive and multidirectional exchanges vertically between leaders and their base, and horizontally between citizens themselves, who can interact and deliberate virtually over time whenever it is convenient for them and at very low cost. Post-representative democracy also holds implications for institutions beyond government and states. It invites us to consider that other organizations like firms, large-scale, big international corporations, are in fact political entities that we need to consider as such and democratize accordingly. Post-representative democracy, finally, operates and applies beyond the nation-state. It is both differently local and more global. So that means thinking about entities like the European Union, but more generally the global system, and eventually also these virtual communities like Facebook, which are as big as countries in terms of their membership, 1.6 billion at this point. And so it's another locus of politics that we need to rethink. So post-representative democracy is people-centric as opposed to government-centric. It allows for new forms of political participation beyond voting in elections, and for a more differentiated, complex, and fluid understanding of the representative relationship. It facilitates greater, more frequent, and more diverse participation from the demos on a voluntary basis. It uses the tools and technologies of our age to construct more open and responsive institutions. It expands what counts as political and operates beyond the boundaries of the nation-state. So that's what I see as the new frontier of democracy. Thank you.